My sister-in-law lifted her wine glass and said, "Some people just can't survive in the deep end." I smiled. Then my director walked through the door, and I laid my federal badge on the table. I stood up and placed my badge on the linen beside her plate. It wasn't always like this. I used to believe one day they'd see me, not just as Ezra's wife or the soft-spoken girl at holiday dinners, but as someone worth noticing, someone real. My name is Rowan Caulfield. I'm 35, and to most of my in-laws, I've always been the quiet one, the polite one, the invisible one. A ghost in their curated family portraits, the one whose name they often forgot to include in place cards at formal dinners. The one Celeste once referred to as Ezra's little hobby. And I let them believe it. In fact, I nurtured the illusion. I didn't fight back when Celeste rolled her eyes during my answers to polite dinner questions, or when Ezra's father asked me yet again what department I worked in, as if he hadn't already forgotten I existed. They thought I worked in a dull, lifeless office with beige walls and dusty ledgers, maybe as a mid-level analyst or a payroll processor. Ezra himself assumed I did something with numbers and called me his cute accountant when he introduced me to his friends. I never corrected him. But the truth, I'm a senior agent at the Office of Federal Financial Investigations, a division of the Treasury tasked with tracking financial crime, corporate fraud, tax evasion, and illicit money flows through shell corporations. My badge isn't decorative. My job doesn't end at spreadsheets. I pull empires apart from the inside out, quietly, surgically, irrefutably. I've walked through million-dollar penthouses posing as a consultant. I've traced shell companies through 4 continents using nothing but a trail of forged receipts. I once testified in a trial that dismantled a billion-dollar scam disguised as a philanthropic tech startup. My signature sent CEOs to prison, but to the Aldens, Ezra's family, I was just Roe. I liked it that way, because invisibility, when chosen, is power, and underestimated women, we move best in silence. I met Ezra 10 years ago at a local nonprofit fundraiser in D.C. He was charming, warm, a little naive. His world was clean, polished, and full of inherited confidence. He believed in goodness because he'd never seen it faked. When he asked what I did, I said, financial analysis. That wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. We married 2 years later in a small garden ceremony. His parents insisted on something grander, but Ezra and I kept it simple. His mother wore white. Celeste gave a speech that was longer than mine. From the start, they measured me by their own standards, pedigree, polish, and public display. I had none of those, but I had something they'd never learned to recognize: precision, clarity, and an understanding of systems most people never see. The Aldens performed wealth. I understood its anatomy. Celeste Alden was the ringleader of the performance. Ezra's sister-in-law, married to his older brother Calvin, gorgeous in a calculated way, always camera-ready, the kind of woman who planned family brunches around golden hour lighting. She ran Norwell and Finch Development, a high-profile real estate firm that mysteriously rose to the top of government bid lists in under 3 years. I never liked her. She never liked me. Celeste didn't hide her disdain either. She called me plain but pleasant. Once said I had the personality of unsweetened tea. During one Thanksgiving, she offered me a silk scarf to brighten up your office cubicle. I smiled and thanked her, and tucked the scarf in the back of my closet. But inside, I remembered everything, because I knew the numbers never lie, and someday I would find the truth behind her glittering empire. That chance came 5 months ago. A tip landed on my desk, anonymous, clean. A single sentence: Norwell and Finch is bleeding the system. I froze, stared at the name. The connection between the firm and my personal life made me hesitate. But then the audit data came in. Flagrant irregularities, inflated invoices, ghost vendors with no tax IDs, offshore wire transfers for non-existent construction projects, a multi-million-dollar government contract tied to a shell company incorporated in Delaware under a misspelled version of Norwell's name. 3 weeks into the probe, my team identified the CEO, Celeste Alden. I choked on my coffee when I saw the name on the executive header. She was at the center of it. Every dollar that went missing passed through her desk. The woman who once called me invisible was laundering public money under the noses of federal agencies. And I was holding the map. Protocol required I disclose the conflict of interest. But the evidence was too critical, the fraud too expansive. My director approved limited continuation while we compiled documentation. I never told Ezra, not because I wanted to lie, but because silence offered protection for both of us. He didn't ask questions. Why would he? I was still the soft one. Still left family events early, still skipped brunches, still wore navy while Celeste wore gold. Nothing had changed, except everything had. I stopped sleeping well. Numbers swirled behind my eyes every night. I traced wire transfers in my dreams. Every time Celeste posted a filtered photo of herself on a yacht with the caption, "Hard work pays off," I thought of the misdirected public funds we'd flagged from the Department of Housing. Still, I didn't flinch. I kept building the case, document by document, line by line. And when the formal investigation was approved, I signed it without hesitation. Because justice doesn't shout, it whispers and waits. The morning of Ezra's mother's birthday, I woke up before sunrise. My laptop was already on. The overhead light buzzed faintly as I sifted through the final stack of flagged invoices, each one a thread in the tangled web that was Norwell and Finch. Wire transfers routed through 4 different states, vendor names that didn't exist, tax write-offs filed against properties that hadn't broken ground. The longer I stared, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping, it was engineered deception. I hadn't touched my coffee. It sat cold beside my keyboard, untouched for an hour. My eyes ached from the screen glare, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Not until I signed the final document. A knock on my office door pulled me back to reality. Ezra. He leaned in, gently already dressed for the dinner, hair neatly combed, shirt ironed. His expression was careful, the way you look at a person you know will say no. "You're skipping the dinner tonight," he asked. I didn't answer right away. My eyes were still on the spreadsheet. The total read $42.7 million unaccounted for. "I've got a full docket," I replied. He stepped in, softly. "It's Mom's birthday, Ro. She'd love to see you." I didn't look up. Celeste already told everyone I wasn't coming, didn't she? Ezra hesitated. She said, "You think you're better than the rest of us?" I closed the folder slowly, my fingers resting on the edge of the laptop. Of course she did. That was her way. Twist silence into arrogance. Turn absence into condemnation. It was always easier to make me the outsider than to wonder what she might have done wrong. "She thinks I'm some bitter wallflower," I said dryly. "It's fine." "Letter?" Ezra's brow creased. "Can you come?" "Just for an hour." I sighed, looked him in the eye. He meant well. He always had. He just didn't know the storm that was coming. "Fine," I said, "but I'll be late." What I didn't say was that I had one more stop before dinner, that I'd be walking into a closed-door meeting with my director and 2 legal officers, that I'd be signing off on a formal motion to freeze Norwell and Finch's assets, that by tomorrow morning Celeste would be in the middle of a federal investigation. I didn't need revenge, I needed results. I dressed simply that evening, a fitted black blouse, small gold studs, my hair pulled into a low bun, the kind of look that wouldn't offend anyone's sensibilities but wouldn't be noticed either. Ezra was waiting for me at the car, smiling nervously. I told him I'd drive myself. I had errands to run beforehand. He didn't press. By 5 p.m., I was in a briefing room across town. My director, Mr. Talbot, greeted me with a folder thicker than any I'd seen on this case so far. "This is enough," he said. "We go in." I nodded. "I've already drafted the request to freeze assets." Legal reviewed the documents in silence. I stared at the images stapled inside photos of Celeste's office, scanned ledgers, transaction maps tracing money across shell accounts. I knew every page by heart. By 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, her accounts would lock. By 11:00, the investigation would be public. And by noon, she'd realize she'd lost everything she built out of smoke and mirrors. I met Ezra's family at the Alden estate just after 8:00 p.m. The driveway glowed with imported cars. The front garden had been lit with soft golden lamps that looked like something out of a magazine spread. The house has always sat perched at the top of the hill like it ruled the valley. Inside, laughter floated down the hallway like theater, polished, rehearsed. Ezra's mother met me at the door. Her smile was warm if tired. "Celeste has been asking about you," she said. "Of course she has," I replied with a polite smile. I stepped into the dining room where a long oak table stretched beneath an extravagant chandelier. Celeste sat at the head, radiant in a sequined gold gown with a diamond necklace too large for the occasion. She looked like royalty, the queen of her own fantasy. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," she announced, lifting her glass. Busy night at the accounting firm. Ezra reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I met Celeste's eyes, calm and unreadable. "Something like that," I said. Dinner was served with all the pageantry of Versailles, a French-trained private chef, imported linens, a full 6-course menu. Celeste insisted on announcing like she'd planned it herself. "Braised lamb over parsnip puree," she purred. "But if anyone's still counting calories, there's a garden salad. For the accountants among us." A few chuckles. Ezra gave me a sideways glance. I didn't flinch. This wasn't new. Celeste had always loved the spotlight, and humiliating others was her favorite stage trick. She kept the attention on herself with barbed charm, but her jabs were never accidental. Every word was aimed. "So, Rowan," she continued, setting down her wine glass with a delicate clink, "tell us what's new in your thrilling world of spreadsheets and tax forms." "It's been a busy quarter," I replied evenly. She smirked. "I'm sure." Meanwhile, Norwell and Finch just closed a $60 million development in Midtown. Ever handle a contract that size, Ezra? He forced a polite smile. "Can't say I have." Well, she shrugged. "Not everyone can handle numbers with that many zeros." "Right, Rowan." Her teeth gleamed. The table laughed quietly. I took a sip of water. "Something like that. You should come shadow me one day," she said brightly. "Get a glimpse into how real companies operate. It's not for everyone. The deep end, I mean." Ezra's hand tensed. I stayed still. "You're lucky, really." Celeste added mock sincerity, coding every word. No pressure, no lawsuits, no regulatory breathing down your neck, just stability. It must be nice. Across the table, Ezra's father chuckled. "Sounds like you need a vacation, Celeste." She laughed too. "Maybe I'll take the yacht out again, the one we picked up in Cannes. You remember Cal Calvin grinned and nodded like a man too used to expensive toys and too dim to ask where they came from. Then, as I was preparing to quietly excuse myself, Ezra's mother asked, "Are we expecting another guest?" "Oh, yes," Celeste beamed. "My new business partner. Very influential. Government ties. Brilliant man. I told him to join us for dessert." She looked right at me, smiling with sugar-coated poison. "You'll love him, Rowan. He's from your world, just a little higher up." I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. "Is that so?" I said. Then came the knock. The knock echoed through the marble hallway, crisp and ceremonial like a starting pistol. Celeste's eyes flicked toward the sound, and she lit up with a look that could have been mistaken for royalty expecting a diplomat. She adjusted her posture, smoothed her gown, tilted her chin like she was preparing for a photo op. "That must be him," she announced to the table, her voice syrupy and smug. The butler stepped away to answer the door, and then everything shifted, because the man who stepped into the Alden dining room wasn't her mysterious business partner. It was my director. Mr. Talbot entered calmly dressed in his usual slate gray suit, not even looking at Celeste as he stepped forward. His presence wasn't loud, but it was impossible to ignore. He walked like a man used to entering rooms where power dynamics didn't matter, because he was the final authority. Celeste's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Silence. Everyone froze. Ezra turned to me slowly, his hand no longer squeezing mine under the table. It simply rested there, as if he'd forgotten how to hold on. Celeste's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers twitched above the stem of the broken glass. "Director Talbot," she finally said, rising awkwardly to her feet. What a surprise! He didn't acknowledge her right away. His gaze swept the room, once then landed on me. "You didn't tell them, did you, Rowan?" My voice felt like a stone lodged deep in my chest. Still, I kept it steady. "No," I said softly. "I haven't told them anything." Celeste's voice rose an octave. "Told us what?" Mr. Talbot smiled politely, then pulled out the empty chair next to her and sat down like he was settling in for dessert. "That your sister-in-law here is the lead federal auditor assigned to Norwell and Finch," he said, his tone casual. "And that starting tomorrow morning your company will be under formal investigation." A pin drop would have been deafening. Ezra's father blinked. Calvin's jaw went slack. Ezra stared at me like he was seeing me through new glass for the first time in 10 years. Celeste, though, went pale. Her mouth trembled slightly as she tried to smile. "That's insane," she whispered. She's not even qualified. She works in finance, low level. She's not even certified for..." I reached into my purse, pulled out the leather badge wallet, and placed it gently on the linen tablecloth. The gold federal seal glimmered beneath the chandelier. "I do?" I said simply. Celeste staggered backward, nearly knocking her chair over. Her composure fractured like a windshield cracking under pressure. "You've been investigating me," she demanded, her voice shrill. "No," I replied evenly. "I've been investigating your company, but as of this evening, I'm formally recusing myself from the case." Mr. Talbot nodded. "Correct. I'll be assuming full oversight starting now." Calvin shot up from his chair. "This is outrageous. You can't just bust into our home like this." "Actually," I interrupted, locking eyes with him, "we can. And you may want to sit down, Cal." Celeste's voice grew sharp, desperate. "On what grounds? What exactly are you accusing me of?" I turned my full attention to her. My voice was level, cold, immovable. "Let's start with the $60 million Midtown deal you boasted about tonight. Then we'll move on to the $42 million funneled through ghost vendors to shell accounts in the Caymans. Or maybe we'll discuss the 3 offshore properties purchased last quarter during a time your company reported massive operational losses." Ezra's mother gasped. Her hands flew to her pearls. "Celeste, is that true?" she whispered. Celeste let out a tight, fake laugh. "This is a setup. She's jealous. This is personal. You know how Rowan is." Mr. Talbot reached into his coat and pulled out a phone. "I'm sure the court will love this setup," he said dryly. He tapped play. Celeste's voice spilled from the speaker, smug and unmistakable, "Relax, Finn. Auditors are clueless. They chase paper. We own the ink." Calvin sat down like he'd been hit with a brick. I turned back to Celeste, calm and composed. "You invited the government into your home tonight. I just didn't have the heart to stop you." Her eyes burned as she lunged across the table, trying to snatch the phone from Mr. Talbot's hand. Her lipstick had smeared. Her earrings swung wildly. She looked feral. "This doesn't prove anything," she barked. "You're bluffing. You don't have real evidence." I calmly reached into my briefcase, unlatched the clasps, and laid a thick folder onto the table. 3 months ago, you invited me to your office, asked me to review your corporate returns because you were bored. I spent 4 uninterrupted hours in that space. She froze. "You mean..." she stammered. "Yes," I said, flipping open the folder to a series of time-stamped photographs. The safe behind the Van Gogh replica. The ledgers marked miscellaneous contracts. I recorded every page. Her hands shook. "You sneaky little careful," Mr. Talbot said coldly. "That kind of language tends to be regretted under oath." Calvin found his voice again. It cracked as he spoke. This can't be real." Ezra leaned forward for the first time. His voice was low but clear. You lied to all of us, Celeste. You bragged about your deals while my wife was building a case to stop you from defrauding the government. I wasn't hurting anyone, Celeste cried. You think rich investors care where the money comes from? My voice dropped to a register I only used when the handcuffs were about to close. Your company redirected retirement funds from a federal employee union to fake contractors. Celeste's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then footsteps. 2 plainclothes agents entered the dining room, jackets marked with their IDs. Miss Alden, one of them said firmly, we have a warrant for your arrest. Celeste backed away. Her chair clattered to the ground behind her. You can't do this. This is my house. No, I said quietly, standing as I adjusted my collar. This house was purchased with laundered funds. It's government property now. Ezra's mother began to sob. His father sat motionless, staring at his untouched plate like he might never eat again. You ruined my life, Celeste screamed as the agents cuffed her hands. I watched her steady, calm. No, I replied. You ruined your own life. I just revealed the truth. She twisted in their grip mascara, streaking down her cheeks, mouth snarling through lipstick. You'll regret this, Rowan. I don't think so, I said. But you might. You've got 30 years to think about it. Her heels clicked violently against the marble as the agents led her out the front door. The house, her stage, went utterly silently dark. Mr. Talbot collected the evidence from the table and nodded respectfully to Ezra. We'll be in touch. And then he left. I stood alone for a moment, letting the silence settle. The candles flickered. The wine dripped from the broken glass. No one said a word. Happy birthday. I thought grimly. The story broke before sunrise. By 6:42 a.m., every major outlet had run the headline Norwell and Finch, CEO arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud probe. Beneath it, a now infamous photo of Celeste being escorted into a federal vehicle, her designer coat draped haphazardly over her cuffed wrists, face turned away from the camera in a failed attempt to hide. But it was too late. The image spread like wildfire. Her name trended for all the wrong reasons, and the comments were brutal. That's what happens when you think you're smarter than the system. Fraud Barbie, finally caught. She always gave me weird vibes. Guess my gut was right. At my desk, I sipped black coffee and watched the broadcast in silence. The newsroom replayed the moment the agents walked her out of the Alden estate like it was a red carpet event. Only this time, the velvet rope was a federal boundary line. They're reporting losses across 4 states, said Nora, one of my colleagues, as she placed a thick binder in front of me. I glanced up. Any offshore seizures? 3 so far, she replied. 2 in the Caymans, 1 in the Azores, all tied to shell accounts linked to her husband's alias. You were right, Calvin wasn't just a silent partner. He was a pipeline. I leaned back, letting the weight of it all press into my spine. How much have we recovered? Just under $150 million so far. And the rest? We're working on it, but Celeste wasn't alone. She never is. These kinds of empires don't survive without accomplices. She paused. You okay? I nodded. Fine. But truthfully, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a strange, hollow quiet. Ezra hadn't said much since the dinner. That night, he sat at the edge of our bed, elbows on his knees, hands steepled in front of his mouth. I don't get it, he said, voice low. Calvin was always the golden one, and now he's in an interrogation room bargaining with the DA. I moved beside him and placed a hand on his back. That's what happens when everything's built on a lie. He inhaled shakily. My parents. They trusted her with everything. The house, their savings, their future. She didn't just take money, I said softly. She took their pride. The mansion was seized within 10 days. The government moved quickly once the financial trail was confirmed. Forfeiture laws meant the property now belonged to the investigation. I helped Ezra's parents relocate to a modest home closer to town. It wasn't grand, but it was safe, manageable, theirs. When Ezra's mother signed the lease, her hands trembled. She looked up at me with wet eyes and whispered, Thank you. We treated you like you were invisible. I'm so sorry. You were just looking in the wrong direction, I said gently. Celeste knew how to shine, but you can't fake integrity. The days blurred after that. Subpoenas, depositions, freezing accounts. Our office became a hive of activity, and yet everything outside the bureau felt like a vacuum. Reporters camped outside the Alden estate for weeks. News vans lined the street. Ezra's name was dragged through commentary shows. His inbox overflowed with interview requests he never responded to. I watched him grapple with the shame of association his last name suddenly stained. One morning, I found him standing in the kitchen, staring at the kettle as if it might explain everything. I don't know who I'm more angry at, he said. Her for what she did, or myself for never noticing. I didn't have an answer. Sometimes you don't notice fire until your whole house is ash. We kept a low profile, declined invitations, ignored gossip. Ezra's extended family split into factions, some defending Celeste's innocence, others blaming the system, a few even blaming me. She set her up, someone posted in a family group chat. She always wanted to take Celeste down. Maybe this was about jealousy. I read them all. Every accusation, every whisper campaign launched to discredit me. I didn't respond. What could I say that evidence hadn't already? Instead, I printed them, highlighted them, filed them in a folder marked Public Perception Patterns. One day, it might help another woman in my position. One day, it might keep another whistleblower from being buried beneath shame and spin. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Celeste. It arrived via the Bureau's legal liaison, opened and pre-screened. A single page, scrawled handwriting, not her usual tight cursive. No formal address, just venom bleeding through ink. You ruined everything. I hope it was worth it. You'll never be more than the girl hiding behind numbers. One day they'll turn on you, too. I stared at the page for a full minute, then placed it in the shredder. Let her cling to power in the only place she had left delusion. About a month after the arrest, I saw her again, in a gray interrogation room that smelled like bleach and cheap coffee. She wore a rumpled blazer and no makeup. Her hair, once professionally styled, now hung in limp strands around her tired face. Her nails were chewed, her eyes sunken. Well, she sneered if it isn't the quiet little accountant. I'm not here for revenge, I said, sitting across from her. I'm here to offer you a deal. She laughed. Harsh. Bitter. Why would you do that after what I said, after what I did? Because you have a choice. Help us recover the remaining funds, give us names, testify, and we may be able to reduce your sentence. Her expression flickered. The mask cracked. For a moment, I saw her not as the queen of the Aldens, but as a scared woman drowning in consequences. And then she spoke. 3 hours later, she started naming names. By the end of the week, we had 12 more arrests, nearly 150 million recovered, dozens of accounts frozen, 3 consulting firms dissolved. And Calvin, her beloved husband, began negotiating his own plea deal. The collapse wasn't loud. It was methodical. Each domino fell with precision, and I watched it from the shadows, because that's where I've always done my best work. The sentencing came 6 months later. Celeste arrived in court wearing a beige jumpsuit and hollow eyes. The woman who once glowed at every dinner draped in silk and ego now looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her roots were showing. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. But she still tried to smirk even as the federal judge began listing her crimes: fraud, wire transfer manipulation, misappropriation of public funds, obstruction. The charges stacked like bricks around her, and as each one was read aloud, I noticed her posture wilt by degrees. Calvin was there too. He wore the same tired expression I'd seen in our financial breakdown files, a man who knew his empire had collapsed and was just waiting to be buried in the rubble. When the sentence came, it felt both surreal and simple. Celeste, 12 years. Calvin, 8. The rest of the inner circle between 5 and 15, depending on cooperation. Some cried, some stared ahead, eyes glassed over. Celeste didn't look at me once. She didn't need to. She'd said everything she could in her silence, and I had answered in mine. Outside the courthouse, Ezra's mother found me near the corridor. Her steps were slow. Her hands trembled. She looked so much smaller than I remembered. "Rowan," she said, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." I met her eyes unblinking. "We never saw you," she whispered. "You were right in front of us, and we looked past you." I hesitated, then reached for her hand. "You weren't looking past me," I said. "You were staring at a spotlight. I just don't need one." She nodded, crying silently. I gave her hand a final squeeze. That night, Ezra and I went home. No victory toast, no statement, just the sound of the dishwasher humming and the quiet click of forks on dinner plates. We sat across from each other at the same table we'd shared for years. It looked the same, felt the same, and yet everything was different. "You ever regret it?" Ezra asked quietly, cutting into his salmon. Keeping it all from me, I thought for a moment. "I don't regret protecting the truth," I said. "Some things only work when they stay hidden long enough to matter." He nodded, eyes fixed on his plate. "I just hate that it was her," he said. "So do I admitted. We didn't speak for the rest of the meal, but it wasn't a cold silence. It was the kind that only exists between two people who've both watched illusions shatter. Later that night, I sat in my home office. On the desk was a framed photo from the dinner taken seconds before the entire illusion collapsed. Celeste stood at the head of the table, glass raised, smile wide. Her sequined gown caught the light. I looked at her frozen expression and wondered how many people she had trampled just to maintain that look of polished superiority, and how long she thought it would last. She still sends letters from prison sometimes. Most are full of barbed insults, empty threats, and sad little power plays. I don't answer them. Her empire is gone. Her name, once synonymous with opulence and charm, is now case study material. We call it the Alden Collapse. New agents study the files like a playbook. Mr. Talbot retired 2 months after the sentencing. Before he left, he came into my office holding a small black box. Inside was his badge. "You've earned this," he said. "You don't need to be loud to be effective. You just need to be sharp." I kept it, not for display, but as a reminder, I'm still with the Bureau, still quiet, still methodical, still pulling threads no one else sees. And I don't need applause, because sometimes justice doesn't roar into the room. Sometimes it walks in quietly, smiles politely, sits at the table, and brings the whole house down. Life resumed oddly enough with a kind of stillness, but I wasn't the same woman they once overlooked. I wasn't just Ro, the quiet wife who brought wine to the table and politely dodged jabs. I was still me, but now they knew. Now they understood that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's discipline. It's a form of power they never thought to fear. Ezra struggled in his own quiet way to reconcile what had been lost, not just the home, the status, or the illusion of family perfection, but the belief that the people closest to him were good simply because they were family. He said to me one night, "My whole life I thought Celeste was flawless. Now I don't know if I ever really knew her at all. I didn't respond. I just rinsed dishes under warm water, because betrayal like that doesn't heal with conversation. It just slowly fades until the ache becomes memory." Sometimes late at night, I'd open the case file again, not for work, but because I needed to see it. The doctored invoices, the scanned office ledgers, the faded line that read, "Federal Road Maintenance Grant, 2.6 million." And I'd remember the cracked streets in that district, the underfunded schools, the broken promises. I didn't feel triumph. I felt fury. Not because Celeste tried to humiliate me, but because she betrayed public trust so casually, because she made people believe justice was a punchline, because she thought no one would ever see through her shine, and because I sat at that table for years, silently watching her building the file, and no one suspected a thing. The next spring, I was invited to speak at a federal oversight symposium. They asked me to present the Alden case as a study in silent infiltration. I agreed. Not for recognition, but for every woman sitting in rooms full of people who underestimated her, for every quiet professional dismissed as nice or plain, for every investigator agent or auditor who's ever been told, "You don't look like someone who changes things." I began my speech with one line. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon in a collapsing empire is a woman who understands numbers. The auditorium fell still, and I told them the story not about Celeste, but about the system, the paper trail, the power of pattern recognition, the impact of unspoken truth. Afterward, a young analyst approached me. Her hands shook slightly as she held out her notebook. "I thought you had to be loud to matter," she said. "Now I'm not so sure." I smiled. "Loud is one kind of power," I told her, "but sharp never needs to shout." That night back in my home office, I looked again at the photo from the birthday dinner, the moment right before the collapse. Celeste's perfect smile, my unassuming presence beside her, the illusion frozen in time. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I was invisible. But she gave me everything I needed the day she decided I wasn't worth watching. Her name now lives in training manuals. Her empire is gone. And I remain still quiet, still watching, still taking down empires, one silent number at a time. Have you ever been underestimated until the truth changed everything? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories just like this one.